So to dive into this presentation now, today I'm going to be presenting on the state of enterprise blockchain adoption and how Xooa is reducing barriers to entry. So a little bit about me initially. My name is Zach Danker-Feldman, and I'm a Yale University economics alumnus. I'm an active member of the Denver blockchain community. It was, of course, a little bit more active before the world changed. I joined Xooa a little over a year ago to evangelize enterprise blockchain adoption. And my role is largely as the public face of the company, traveling around the country, giving presentations at conferences, meetups, and other events. Now it's more focused on those other events, of course, now in the more virtual as well. So like volunteering at the Hyperledger virtual booth at Consensus Distributed, which was very well run. Today on the agenda, I'm going to be talking about enterprise blockchain adoption in general, and then I'm going to dive into barriers to entry, as well as talking a little bit about public versus private blockchains, the benefits and detriments of both, and how where enterprises are leaning. Then I'm going to jump into how Xooa changes the nature of enterprise blockchain adoption for all businesses, and then I'll have a demo of the platform so that this isn't just a discussion around all this, you can actually see what our platform looks like. And while I'm going through the demo, the features of our platform, I encourage people to sign up for the platform themselves. It's a very simple free registration where you get 50 free blocks to test out when testing out the platform. So to dive in, Deloitte ran a 2019 global blockchain survey where they polled large corporations on their attitudes and investments in blockchain technology, and a few stark stats stood out. 53% say that blockchain technology has become a critical priority for their organizations, which was a 10-point increase from 2018. However, only 23% have initiated a blockchain deployment. So right off the bat, that indicates that this industry is headed in the right direction, but there are still many barriers to entry and relatively few mature use cases. So there's work still to be done in this regard. What it looks like in 2020, things are starting to change a little bit. First off, blockchain turned 11 this year, which is a massive milestone. So it's a very nascent industry still, but the amount of growth over these past 11 years, growth into the enterprise industry, has been massive. That being said, the adoption of the technology has not occurred with the ferocity that the crypto hype of 2017 indicated to many. Instead, we've seen slower, more challenging growth than many people might have expected. But that's because largely we're breaking out of legacy systems and people are still really discovering the benefits of this technology. We've seen a move from blockchain tourism and more toward utilizing the technology to solve real business issues and deliver real value. So now in 2020, we can see that the prevailing question among executives has transitioned from, will this technology work, to how can we make this technology work for us? I was reading some stats a little earlier, and this change in this change in sentiment became a little bit more apparent when I read that 86% of large corporations in the US are building blockchain teams, while outside of the US, for those large firms, 70% are building blockchain teams. So it's clear that blockchain is ultimately here to stay, and 2020 is the start of its decade. And for the vast majority of viable enterprise blockchain use cases, private networks like Hyperledger have been the most popular. Why is that the case? Well, apologies. Why is that the case? Let's look into it. So when an enterprise is choosing between public and private networks, there are several important factors to consider. And primarily, these are data isolation, infrastructure management, and scalability, amongst others. And these factors can make that decision a little bit tough. To start with public blockchains, public networks have low overhead because they're public and serverless. So there's minimal infrastructure to manage and they're immediately available. If you want to keep data private on a public blockchain, you rely on encryption instead of actual physical isolation of that data. In its current state, it's also much less scalable and reliable. So while many companies want to adopt private blockchains, only those with the deepest pockets can oftentimes afford it. So they end up settling for public chains despite the issues that you see here, as well as several others. Like, for example, I believe Ethereum transactions right now are just over 45 cents per transaction. So that's an ongoing variable cost. As I alluded to before, private networks are more secure in the long run as they rely on physical isolation of data. A private community of participants are known to each other and they want to share data with a greater degree of security and not reveal transaction data to the public. Finally, because all parties are known in a private consortium, enterprises can resolve more immediate problems than on a public cryptocurrency blockchain, allowing for more scalability and reliability. With all that said, they require a lot of overhead for infrastructure. And while frameworks like Hyperledger Fabric can be used, customization, testing, deployment, and maintenance require a lot of time, expertise, and resources. So to summarize all of that, it's the technological complexities of private chains that are the primary barriers for enterprise blockchain adoption. To summarize everything I just discussed in general, the advantages of blockchain are there, but the cost of adopting the technology outweighs either the benefits or the non-blockchain workarounds. The solution to this problem would be to significantly reduce the cost so that the benefits outweigh the alternatives. Enter Xooa. So Xooa is an enterprise blockchain cloud application platform that's focused on reducing barriers for enterprise blockchain adoption by making blockchain app development easier, faster, and higher quality. We're also a Hyperledger-Certified Service Provider, and as John mentioned, very active in the Hyperledger community. With this focus on blockchain app development, I want to elucidate what that means by describing the blockchain as a service landscape a little bit to help you navigate it. So there are two types of blockchain as a service cloud services. There are consortium platforms, which are focused on the underlying infrastructure, the core blockchain services, and governance. Then there are your application platforms, which are focused more on the creation of business applications, either for general productivity or for specific verticals. And this is what it looks like in the context of companies. On the left side, you have your consortium and infrastructure companies, your larger legacy players like IBM, Azure, Amazon, and Oracle that have the capacity to operate those, to provide the cloud networks that blockchains need to run on, those 24/7 services that they need. Applications like Kaleido, Block Apps, and Xooa are focused more on the application layer. Specific to Xooa, we abstract away the complexities of blockchain, more so than any other company I've seen personally. A deep understanding of blockchain or extensive DevOps efforts is not necessary in order to begin developing a blockchain application on the Xooa platform. We have several key differentiators. We offer pre-built smart contract templates that are known as Xooa managed smart contracts for popular use cases that put the blockchain to use instantly. For example, we have contact tracing potential, asset management, voting, bonds, etc. We offer custom smart contracts with valuable developer productivity tools and integrations, including deployments through GitHub, extensions through VS Code, and continuous integration and continuous deployment Jenkins plugin. We have ready-made integrations that enable popular applications to gain a cryptographic distributed ledger on the back end immediately, including with DocuSign, Dropbox, QuickBooks, and more. So Xooa enables organizations to quickly develop proof of concept prototypes that can serve as the basis for enterprise production deployment. We allow for rapid prototyping and experimentation in a consortiumless, otherwise known as a centralized environment. We offer an iterative development on a complete stack. And then once you have that validation of that proof of concept, you can use that to build a multi-party trust model, essentially go from a centralized environment to a distributed environment on any cloud, including Xooa's. So you can put it where your data already is. For businesses, this means that you can take advantage of the resources and personnel that your business already has in a much more cost-effective and efficient manner. This shortens time to app. It gives early exposure of blockchain apps and context to stakeholders. And finally, it delays the deployment of the consortium until the app is ready for production. So you don't have to spin up your own network, allow it to operate 24/7, and keep adding these different proof of concepts, adding more and more transactions to this network, and paying absurd amounts of money in order to just determine if this is going to work at all in the first place. That in turn makes this a possible, makes blockchain development accessible not only to your Fortune 100 companies, but also your small fintech startups or your health firms. There's no real limit there, as we're an industry agnostic company. And overall, this means you can reduce risks and costs of building blockchain apps. For developers, this means you can utilize the commonplace concepts and tools that you're already using when building your non-blockchain applications. This allows you to spin proof of concepts in days and keep them cataloged forever on the cloud. It also on our platform, you can use middleware that's already baked in, shifting the concern of API endpoints, queuing, and scalable asynchronous processing from the developer to Xooa, which adds a further layer of reliability to your blockchain deployments. What this means is that you can easily experiment with proof of concepts and build reliable production-ready applications. Overall, this means that you can focus on business problems, not blockchain problems. Earlier, I talked a little bit about that 2019 Deloitte blockchain survey. Well, there were 5 barriers to entry, and 4 of those that Xooa directly impacts. Since we're simplifying the equation to allow companies to rapidly prototype and explore and discover effective use cases. Those 4 include implementation, potential security threats, lack of in-house capabilities, and uncertain ROI. With any luck, we'll be able to drive actionable use cases and accelerate these trends in a positive direction. So thus far, with our experiences, we've learned a lot. There have been a lot of diverse use cases of our platform, including in voting, tokenization on a private ledger, including ERC20 and 721 tokens, lab management, software entitlement, integrations with popular applications, and more. Mature use cases are growing in the industry, with crypto becoming less and less of the overarching focus. And we're moving away from blockchain being offered as a solution in and of itself and more toward solving actual problems. We've also received interest from several large players looking into blockchain, including several of the top 5 IT consulting firms. And overall, we've discovered a largely positive trend. And that's that while the blockchain market is still developing, it's quickly progressing beyond the hype curve and gaining true value. I'm now going to dive into a demo of the Xooa platform to give you a little bit of context so you can actually see the platform instead of me just telling you about these things. So here we have the Xooa console with its various available features. These include 3 sections: the custom smart contract section, the Xooa managed section, and the off-chain integrations down here. For the sake of this example, I'm going to dive into the custom smart contract, and then I'm briefly going to show an XLDB smart contract as well. The XLDB is the easiest means of putting the blockchain to use immediately. It's going to look like a standard database for most, with added blockchain capabilities. So whether you're a developer or a more business-minded person, you can use this very easily. So to go into custom smart contracts, here you can see my past smart contracts that I developed that are cataloged on the cloud for future use. So say I built a supply chain application 6 months ago or so, and I have a new client coming up now that is asking me to potentially build a supply chain deployment. I can pull up this old smart contract, maybe wipe out any old sensitive data, and use this as an example of what that network would look like instead of theoretically discussing it. I'll select deploy new. I have my choice of DLT here. Sawtooth and Corda are currently in the pipeline, but Ethereum and Fabric are currently available. I'll choose Hyperledger Fabric, and then I have my choice of source down here. I can pull from the Xooa GitHub, public or private GitHub, my local architecture, or I can write code directly in the browser. I'll choose the Xooa GitHub. I'll do the balance transfer smart contract. And here you can see I have a couple networks that I can deploy on. These are pre-configured on their respective networks and then integrated with the Xooa platform so that I could deploy on them if I so choose. For the sake of this example, I'm going to use the Xooa network. So this is the Hyperledger Fabric 1.4 network here. I believe we have 2.0 in the pipeline as a framework, by the way. But for now, for the sake of this example, I'm going to use our Xooa cloud. And down here, you can just see our basic what's going on in this smart contract. So A has 200 units and person B has 100 units. So I'll select deploy. And in the background, my own siloed Hyperledger Fabric network is being created. The underlying chain code is being instantiated, and most all of the heavy lifting of the blockchain is being done for me. As I mentioned before, this is useful for experimentation and proof of concepts using our developer productivity tools, as well as our pre-built Xooa managed smart contracts, so that you can experiment in a bunch of different areas with the blockchain. It's also useful for then developing production-ready deployments and coordinating with your team using our team collaboration tools here. Here I have my API token. This is my means of identifying myself to the network. I can also use it to integrate with external applications. But for now, I'm going to copy it as my means of gaining permissions. And as you can see here, my app has been successfully deployed. So that took a little under a minute. I've been talking a bit much. So it'll probably take any of you that decide to try out the Xooa platform a little bit less time. If I want to check the underlying chain code, or where I'm pulling the code from, I can go to view on GitHub. And if I want to customize this, I can fork this repo and customize it to whatever my requirements, my needs are. In order to interact with the smart contract, I go to the API tab. And here I have my API sandbox. I'll enter my API token, select authorize API. And I now have the permission to interact with the smart contract through these endpoints. I'll select invoke, try it out, and I'll transfer 50 units from A to B. Select execute, and in a couple seconds, I'll get a 200 response code, a unique transaction ID, and my updated payload here. If I want to make an adjustment to this transaction, say I want to transfer 100 units from B to A instead, I can select execute again, and after a couple seconds, another 200 response code, unique transaction ID, and an updated payload. If I go to the world state, I can see the state of the world as it currently is, how A owns 250 units and B owns 50 units. So this is a mutable data store that'll be similar to most data stores that are around. If I then want to look at the blockchain capabilities, I would go to the transactions tab and I would see a list of all of the past transactions that have taken place on this smart contract. So this is the auditable, immutable portion of this database. To show a couple other features as well, if I go to the identities tab, I can easily manage user permissions and create new identities as well. I can create John, an identity, add reader write permissions and the ability to manage identities, select create, and suddenly John would have an API token that he could then use. From the logs tab, I can easily debug as these logs are generated by the smart contract directly in the browser. So this streamlines this process of debugging, making it much, much simpler. If I go to the Manage tab, I have a couple capabilities here, including upgrading the app from the latest code of the GitHub repo, as well as creating an endorsement policy directly from the UI. So that's a very simple process. I could create an endorsement policy that would then be followed either by, that would then be followed by peers operating on external services, whether that's Azure, IBM, Google, any of those other platforms. To show how those would work, if I go to the external peers tab here, if I want to simply extend my network that's operating on Xooa and add an observing or endorsing peer, that's a very simple process. Here you can see how to simply deploy one of the, configure one of these external peers on any of these networks by following a simple step-by-step process. If I want to deploy entirely on an autonomous external network, I can go to the Networks tab. And here you can see pre-configured networks that I put together prior to this demo. If I want to add a new one, there's a simple import. You can simply import configuration files from each of these platforms wherever you see fit, where you would just drag and drop, and each of these fields would then be auto-populated for you. The orders, organizations, certificate authority servers, and peers. What that would look like if, say, I select import, and I want to import an AWS network. I have my configuration JSON file here. Could select save, and immediately my network has now been put together and I can operate this if it is a live network on the Amazon Managed Blockchain platform. Finally, if I go to the Ledger tab, this will look similar to something this might look familiar to what a lot of people here have seen. This is based off of the Hyperledger Explorer application. And is an easy way of visualizing what's going on in your blockchain. If I go to my custom smart contract ledger, I can go to the transactions tab, and here you'll be able to see a set of the past transactions that have taken place. You can see the transactions that I recorded on the ledger for the balance transfer blockchain application that I put together specifically for this demo. I can also go to the blocks tab here. If, say, I'm a data architect that's curious about the integrity of each of these blocks. These include a block hash calculator where I can autofill, select calculate hash, and here you can see that the chain is intact. If I were to, say, instead change this 9 to an 8 and calculate the hash once again, you can see that this block hash is entirely different and the chain is now broken. So another interesting capability. Finally, I see we're approaching the end of the hour. So to just briefly dive into one of these Xooa managed smart contracts, I'll select the XLDB smart contract, and I'll use one of these older smart contracts that I put together. The UI for each of these Xooa managed smart contracts is unique to that specific use case. So say, for example, if I were to go into a voting smart contract, you would be able to easily vote through this this field here, and the API sandbox is unique to this context. So returning to the XLDB smart contract, we have a low-code form builder here, where instead of having to understand how to typically put a transaction into one of these, into a ledger, you can instead build your own low-code form based on whatever fields you see fit, and use that as a means of adding transactions to your ledger. So what this looks like, if I go to add here, you can see that I have two forms that have been put together for me. I'll do a vehicle document type, and I'll use a sample. Each of these fields have been filled in, and you can think of this as a, say, a DMV vehicle registration database, where all of this information is pertinent to a registration of your vehicle, and you're using the VIN number as a means of organizing this database. So all of this information has been filled in. I'll select save. And after a couple seconds, you'll see this transaction has been saved, and all of this information has been saved in this JSON file, or onto the ledger. So now it's saved for future use. That's essentially all of the features I wanted to show in this presentation. I encourage, again, as I mentioned before, whoever's on this call to sign up for a free trial on our platform. It's a simple process, and you get 50 free blocks right off the bat to begin experimenting with the blockchain. I appreciate everyone's time on this call, and I'll now take questions.
Yeah, that's great, Zach. It looks like Richard had a good question about the different costs for using the different blockchain networks that you put up there.
Of course.
Can you maybe cover, how that looks and maybe what's more cost effective across the board?
Mm-hmm. It depends on the nature of what network you're going to be building. Largely, we have two separate types. There's a premium network in which your free and premium tier users would operate on a shared network on Xooa's cloud. But each user has their own private channel that they can give other users of the platform access to as they see fit. This is charged on a per 100 block basis, as well as bulk block pricing as well, depending on how many you're going to be using. So that's more useful in general for experimentation and proof of concept use cases, especially if you're going to be putting sensitive data onto the blockchain. If you want to operate an entirely dedicated network, you can operate on a network that we put together for you, or in which you will be charged in several different areas, including SDLC users, the smart contract that you use, that type of thing. But if you're operating on an external network on IBM, AWS that you put together on your own, those charges are entirely unique to that platform, and block use is not charged through us, since we're not holding on to that data. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I'm just going to unmute. Is that okay, John?
Yeah, go ahead and ask directly. Absolutely.
Easier than typing.
Sure.
Yeah, it did. Thank you. And if you don't mind, maybe I'll just, for time's sake, I'll ask you a question about that afterwards. But I did have one more question. It just goes right back to the last example you used about the car, putting in the VIN number and the data and everything. That interface there, is that something, okay, it's not like if you had a customer, a retail customer, for example, that went in, would not see that. That would be seen in my back office through a developer creating that content, or is that someone like who would log in through a web browser, would have to input all that data using that interface? Do you understand what I'm trying to drive at? It's just the regular person versus the technical person. Thank you.
Of course. I want to make sure I give you an exactly like a right answer for that. I don't have a specific answer for that for you yet, specifically for our forms implementation, because we don't have this was just implemented. That being said, we allow you to integrate with outside applications as long as there's some sort of API function. So I could easily right now show you a Google Forms integration that I have for loan applications that were submitted on the Google Forms application and show up on the Xooa Ledger database. But I want to be sure that I answer your question properly. So if you want to reach out to me afterwards, I can give you a concrete answer there.
Will do. Thank you.
Of course.
Okay, other questions for Zach about Xooa? Looks really straightforward to deploy a blockchain solution. And what I really like about Xooa is it takes kind of the whole, deep dive on the code out of the equation so you can get your proof of concept up quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Zach, well, we really appreciate that. Everyone get his email address up there and feel free to go to Xooa.com, log in and test it out. And we look forward to catching up with you on the next meetup, which we're going to be planning for July. So thanks everyone for joining this one, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Fantastic. Thank you, John.